Hi, my name is Fides Neafie, and I was born on November 19, 1962
In
in Cebu City, Philippines.
I'm Chris Kelly, and I was born on September 10th, 1957 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
I'm Ron Neafie, and I was born in Youngstown, Ohio, December 15, 1933. And I was the major parasitologist, you might say senior parasitologist at the AFIP for 46 years, from 1963 to 2009.
how did you get here? How did you end up here in 1963? Short.
How did I get here? I think I got here by way of God, because I had taught high school in Prince George's County for 2 years, and I enjoyed teaching, and but at the same time there were some things I didn't like about it. But at any rate, I heard where someone was advertising from the AFIP for someone that knew parasitology. Basically, the AFIP is pathology, and pathology is basically a benign or malignant. So when you talk about things like worms, where you have it in tissue, say a worm in the lung, and you don't have the whole worm out in front of you. You have pieces of it cut up. And I saw that that was an area that the AFIP really needed help with. Because, I mean, first of all, pathology, they're not strong in parasitology. It's, tumors is the thing. So, in fact, all of infectious disease is not something that they're really trained well at as pathology in general. And the other thing is that when I came to the AFIP, I found out that they had worms, bottles of them, from all over the world.
What do you mean?
So I got these worms and I had them cut up, serial cut, just like you take a loaf of bread. So I could look at every one of those sections and learn, and I published on most of these as to describing them from histopathologic sections, not having the whole worm out in front of you. So this was a need I felt I could help them with. And although when I first came to the AFIP, I wasn't really doing that. I came on as a microbiologist, and I was rearing reduvid bugs and mosquitoes and trapping animals and whatever. I wasn't really looking at specimens. And then the persons that I were working for, we infected various animals for research, and then it came time to find the organisms that we inoculated them with. And they gave me a couple cases from some of the animals, raccoons, woodchucks, foxes. We were inoculating all kinds of animals. And they thought I had an eye for finding these guys in tissue. So it wasn't long till I was really out at a research center out at Patuxent, Maryland, not at the main headquarters.
Not here.
Not here at all. They had a satellite out at Patuxent.
I mean, when were you out there?
The what?
When were you out there, Ron?
Oh,
What year?
I was out there for about 6 years.
Oh,
I think
but
I was
you started
16.
here. You started here, and then you went.
No, I started there.
Okay.
And after a couple of years, we inoculated all these animals and whatever. Now we need to look at the tissues, the damage they cause and where they are and whatever. So I went from, Patuxent is out at Beltsville, Maryland, near the Agricultural Research Center. And so I came downtown then. And that was a tremendous change for me because I was very active and out, trapping animals and whatever. And now I'm looking through a microscope, sitting there all day long. And that was really hard for me to sit and look through a microscope.
Let's take a break. And then
Unbelievable.
Okay,
But-
we'll come back.
We'll come back.
Keith.
We're going to
Come
come
back,
back to
Ron.
you, Ron.
Okay.
Okay.
But at any rate, I adjusted and loved it.
Oh, good, okay, so that's a good time to break.
Okay.
Well,
All right.
So Chris, when did you
Yeah.
start here and how did you?
On the Walter Reed campus, I came to the Walter Reed campus itself in July of 1989 to serve as the community relations officer in the public affairs office at Walter Reed. And I held that position for a little over a year when I first arrived here. And in that role, we were interacting with the local community, giving tours to VIP visitors, handling all kinds of requests that came up from the community standpoint. But there was an opportunity that presented itself up the hill, as we called it, at the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, which is present still here. The building 54, the original building, is still here, to serve as their public affairs officer. And I went over there on a part-time basis in 1990 and joined the Institute full-time in 1991 and was with them for 16 or 17 years. I left in 2006 after the BRAC was announced. But it was a wonderful organization with a deep, rich history tied to the Department of the Army, the history of what was once called the Army Medical Museum, which became the National Museum of Health and Medicine and was located in our building, and then the Tri-Service Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, which is really a national institute of pathology with a military mission. We were Army, Navy, Air Force, and as well as civilians, and we attracted and retained some of the most wonderful scientists, physician scientists, and scientists from around the world. And I can explain that in greater detail later. But that was their, and my role was as public affairs officer. I did communications, did briefings, did a newsletter, did a variety of events all the time up there. It was a fascinating place with a wonderful organization. Got to know tremendous people, just tremendous organization.
Were you civilian or were you?
A civilian, right. And all of the civilians that worked at AFIP, if they were federal employees, they were Department of the Army employees. We also had a nonprofit sister agency called the American Registry of Pathology, or ARP. That was a group that was designed to help us interact with the civilian medical world. And we hired a number of people who worked at the AFIP who were ARP employees, as they were called. All in all, there were probably 500 to 600 employees at the Pathology Institute during my time there.
Okay, so we'll come back. So you also worked.
Yes, so let me say how I got to the AFIP. So I was in my last year of residency training in pathology in the Philippines when I had to come over here to the US to get my green card. This was in 1995. And so while waiting to get my green card, because I was staying with my aunt in Virginia, so my father he advised me, why don't you not look into fellowship training in the area? And we've heard of the AFIP, Armed Forces Institute of Pathology. As a pathologist, it's the Supreme Court, all over the world. It's very well known. So I applied in the Department of Infectious Disease, and fortunately I got in. So I started my fellowship training as a Calendar Binford Fellow in July of 1996 in the Department of Infectious Disease, and under the tutelage of Dr. Wayne Myers, who was the chief of the mycobacteriology branch. And so there were several fellows at the AFIP, different departments, because the AFIP, it's a pathology institute, so all the organs, if you think about it, all the organs of the body, like skin, that's dermatopathology, soft tissue pathology, of the ophthalmic path, pulmonary pathology, all that. So each department had a fellow, and I must say I was just very privileged and honored to be a fellow at the AFIP. So we had to do research, and that was one of the requirements as a fellow, was to do research at the same time, look at cases, pathology cases.
So would it have been a 2-year fellowship, or?
Yes, actually it was a one-year fellowship going into 2 years, depending on the department, if they wanted to let you go on for 2 years, which I did. So I stayed on for 2 years, and then Dr. Myers wanted me to stay on further to do research on Bruley ulcer. So I was there till 2000, the year 2000, and then I left.
You left altogether from
I'm sorry?
You left Walter Reed.
I
in 2000.
left AFIP, yes.
So you came to get your green card, you came to Washington to get your green card, and you
Yes,
stayed.
and since I was already on my last year of training in pathology, I wanted to do subspecialty, and infectious disease was, I wanted to do infectious disease, especially leprosy, because let me tell you this. My father, being a pathologist in the Philippines, he worked as the pathologist at Leonard Wood Memorial, which is a leprosarium in Cebu City, Philippines. So I wanted to follow in his footsteps, and I want to help the Filipino people, because at the time leprosy was, it was quite common at that time in the 1990s. Now there's a good treatment for it right now, so the cases have declined. Yeah, so that's how I was able to.
So were you researching leprosy here?
Yes, we did, under Dr. Myers, we did get some leprosy cases, but he switched over to Mycobacterium ulcerans, or also known as Bruley ulcer, which is also the same. It's also a mycobacterium, just like leprosy, and that was actually the main project that we had was on Mycobacterium ulcerans, which I must say, in 1998, the World Health Organization started a Bruley ulcer initiative, and Dr. Myers, my boss, was actually instrumental in being able to make that as for the WHO to have more interest in Bruley ulcer, because Bruley ulcer is not found here in the U.S. It's cases are usually they're found in West Africa and Australia, South America, and actually we found 1 or 2 cases also in the Philippines.
But it could affect Americans who are stationed in one of those countries, or, right?
I'm sorry? Yeah.
Wouldn't it affect Americans who are stationed, military personnel who are stationed in one of those countries, or was it strictly?
Well, see, it all depends, because the mode of transmission is not completely understood, but they were saying it's more environmental, and that it's more in locations wherein there's slow, stagnant water, they say. So I don't know whether the military bases, if they're in that area, but probably not, It's more rural areas, and yeah.
So now, Ron, why don't you tell an average day on the job?
What was it like on an average day on the job there? Explain how that would work.
You're talking about switching from being very active to sitting, looking through a microscope. Well, let me be, I'll mention a couple of things here real quick. first of all, not being a pathologist, I didn't know lung from brain. So I had a lot of work to do to identify just the tissues, because this is all new to me. And not only that, it's one thing to look at lung that's normal. It's also something else to look at lung where all the tissues necrotic due to TB. So number one is to learn what the normal tissue looks like, and then to learn what the abnormal tissue looks like. And then to look for the organisms that cause these changes. But it was amazing. I got to where I could look through a microscope probably 10 hours a day without getting out of the seat. The other thing is patience. I've had people tell me I had a lot of patience, and I don't have I might not have for people, true. But I did have for those worms.
I must say.
And I mean, I could get those, I started then looking at cases, not experimental, but here's a case of TB. Dr. Winslow was in charge of the infectious disease division at that time. He'd get a case in from somebody that they thought was TB, and he'd give it to me. Ron, can you find the organism in here? And I guess I did have a good eye, and I didn't like giving up. If there's an AFB in there, I want to find it. I don't want someone else to find it and come back and say, hey, Ron, you missed this. That was devastating. That took months for me to get over that, but it was a rare event, and I made it a rare event.
So you were allowed to take whatever time you needed or wanted.
Were you allowed to take whatever time you needed or wanted to get the case done?
Whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, my bosses were great.
Yeah.
It was amazing, and I might also say this, that my bosses were MD pathologists. But I never felt that they were ever really jealous of me, even though people would come in and want someone to look at a slide, and many times they would come to me rather than coming to them. And then here's a pathologist and, board certified and whatever, and I'm nothing. But I just happened to be at the right place at the right time, and I had terrific mentors. It was amazing that the AFIP had the best. And you have to understand that, if you're in a hospital, let's say at Holy Cross, you're a pathologist, you look at everything that comes through the path lab, whether it's lung, liver, heart, kidney, whatever. At the AFIP, the person in hepatic, liver pathology, that's all he did. All day long, every day of the year, he studies only liver. Of course it's got to be good. How could it not be good? And he's looking at liver from all over the world, because we have military all over the world. But I had an opportunity because of being the AFIP to look at malaria all over the world. If you were in Indonesia, all you saw was the malaria in Indonesia, pretty much. But at the AFIP, it was amazing. You could study, things that, some infections there were only a half a dozen cases in the world, and we had 3 of them. Because no one else could figure out what they were, so if you send them all into the AFIP, even if there's only 5 in the world, they can be an expert on those 5. Where if there are 5 different hospitals, you can't do that. So it was, I just can't conceive of a better job.
And you met your wife there.
Yeah, 2 of
Huh?
them. Yeah. Lucky them.
The first thing.
Why don't you tell the story then?
Well, the first thing. Okay, so when I first came to the AFIP, when I met, this is funny. I don't want to say it though, because when I first met Ron, the first thing he says to me is, "Do you run?" And I've never run in my life. I've never jogged in my life, you know, and I'm like, no, I'm sorry, I don't. But he encouraged me to go, you know, because it was good for you, it's healthy for you, go jogging. So we would jog, Mary, you know, Mary, she's one of the staff pathologists there, Mary, me, and and Chris is also,
Chris ran.
yeah, ran too. So, oh my God, he would run every day, right, Ron? Every day, practically every day. I'm like, I would get shin splints actually from running every day. I couldn't do that, but this guy's amazing. And let me tell you about Ron though. When I was a fellow there at the AFIP, that's what he said. So the pathologists would come over to the department and they would look for this guy. And I'm like, I mean, you know, you would think that Ron was the department chair because they would show their cases to him. And I'm like, wow, you know, he knows his stuff. And with regards to patients, I have to tell you this, as a pathologist, because, you know, it's more, we look at the microscope and they're tumors, right? They're masses, like any breast mass or whatever, and we say whether it's benign or malignant. In the case of the Department of Infectious Disease, it's quite different. We would have conferences every day. We would get our cases, we show our cases, and we would spend hours looking to the microscope for organisms. And to me, that was quite new. Because for me, as a pathologist, I'm like, I just look at the microscope and I can tell you whether it's benign or malignant. But in the case of infectious disease, it's not so. You have to have a lot of patients looking for bugs.
Because they might not be on a,
Right.
in the sample.
Yes, and you have to screen. You really have to screen every field on the slide so you don't miss out on anything. And Ron was so good at that. He can really, you know, he's really good. Yeah, he can really find the bugs. I have to say. Anyway, yeah, just really quite new. And I have to say, aside, I mean, I was also given the opportunity to rotate in some of the departments, sit in their conferences when they discuss cases, and they were giants in the land. They're world-renowned pathologists. You know, all these, they're world-renowned, and I have to say that when the AFIP, when you give these cases to the pathologists at the AFIP for second opinion, they usually have the last say because they're really that good. Yeah, so I really had a wonderful time there. Yeah, the people were so nice. So, I mean, you know, they're so low-key. They're brilliant men and brilliant pathologists, and yet they're just so low-key, humble, and yeah.
Were there very many women in the AFIP?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I can't remember. I couldn't break down the whole number, the ratio, but there was an equal number of men and women, female pathologists as well.
Let me just say this. When I came to the AFIP in '63, there were very few women pathologists, period. When I left, probably half of them were women. So,
When did you leave?
in the last 20 years or so, women have really inundated the pathology field. Well, that's fine.
When did you leave?
When did you leave AFIP, Ron?
2009.
2000.
And the
Okay.
building, now, they said if you could get another job, get one, because we knew that, you know, it was, what's the word?
Bracked.
Racked.
Mhm.
So I had another opportunity. Someone else wanted to hire me at a good salary, so I left in 2009, and they said 5 years they were going to close, and they did close in 2011, wasn't it?
2011, right.
2011. So I left a couple of years earlier because I knew they were closing. If they were open, I'd be there today. Absolutely.
Chris, tell me about what your day was like. Or maybe
Oh.
like a really good day or maybe a bad day.
Oh, a little bit of both. It was a very exciting job to be at AFIP, especially during those years. So I was responsible for all the external and internal communications. I produced a bi-monthly newsletter called the AFIP Letter. They called it the letter because years before I got there, it was literally like a 2-page letter that focused on highly scientific stuff for pathologists around the world. And what I did was to take it, expand it, modernize it, and expand the mailing list. And we sent it out to thousands of pathologists across the country and around the world. So that always involved stories of talking to our pathology group, getting things lined up for things like that. If there were special events or visitors coming, we had regular visitors coming here, were either pathologists or other medical professionals, or meetings that would be taking place inside the building, I would handle that. And working as a liaison with the other agencies here on campus, with the main Walter Reed, with the Walter Reed Army Institute of Research, which was nearby, with all the other activities there. I was really fortunate that I came to not only a wonderful academic institute, we also had an operational side, which became our largest department, and that was the Office of the Armed Forces Medical Examiners. The medical examiners were the federal medical examiners, essentially. They did all of the forensic investigations for all branches of the military, and at times when they were called upon in other instances to handle things. And so when there were military aircraft accidents, they did the investigations. When there were soldiers killed in action, they did all of the autopsies and the forensic review on that. So that kept me very busy.
So they would be brought here, the
Actually-
bodies would be brought here?
Actually, no. The bodies were brought to Dover Air Force Base Port Mortuary, but our original staff offices were here in Building 54. They had offices. And autopsies were typically done either here at Walter Reed or over at the National Naval Medical Center at Bethesda for local autopsies. In the 1990s, we initiated a DNA identification laboratory, and we expanded greatly the work that went on. And our DNA lab was done to help identify war dead, as well as high-profile cases that would come through. Probably the most high-profile that we did was that our lab identified the remains of Air Force Lieutenant Michael Blassie, who was in the Tomb of the Unknowns over at Arlington. He had been killed in Vietnam, and they had an idea that it was him, and they did extensive high-level DNA testing on him. Our lab was located in Rockville, Maryland. It's no longer there. It's now all associated and has moved to Dover, Delaware. That group really kept me busy with all kinds of things. There was always an event going on. They were always in the news, particularly with DNA identification work. And also, of course, we had the 2001 terror attacks. Our medical examiner team performed all the forensic identifications of those who were killed in the Pentagon. So that was a busy time as well. The days were fascinating. The day-to-day work, like Fides has said and like Ron has said, you would deal with esteemed pathologists who were making difficult second opinion pathology diagnoses on hard to diagnose cases, and that was a fascinating thing too. I'd be glad to get into a little of the history of the building for you and the background of who we are if you'd like. I can do that later.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but, well, those were good days and bad days?
Yeah, good and bad days. Yeah, it was maybe negotiating the parking was a bad day here. Parking was a nightmare.
Parking.
Parking was a nightmare. That's always a bad day. They built the Rumball garage. The garage, which is still in existence, wasn't here when I got here, and you had to take a bus, park out at Forest Glen to come in. That's always a bad day. And then once I was able to get up to AFIP, I was able to secure a parking spot. Now, if you had the spot and you moved out at lunchtime to get something, good luck trying to get it back.
Yeah.
This area right behind us here was a parking lot, so you'd be driving around trying to find parking. That was always a headache. Parking was always a headache. The neighborhood was great. I did wind up running with Ron, and we would go running through the neighborhood, or we played soccer down here. With other folks, I played once or twice a week at lunchtime at the park right down here. That was always fun.
Down here in that rose garden?
No, right down the street. I don't know if it's called Fort Stevens
Fort
Park.
Stevens Rec Center.
Yeah, the rec center. There's a
Yeah.
big field there. We played soccer there all the time at lunchtime, a couple days a week. It was really fun, especially in the hot weather. And there was always something happening at AFIP. So it was never a really bad day. It was just you knew other stuff was coming. You're always planning for things and doing things. It was a fascinating place to work. Just a wonderful place. It was like home.
Well, tell
That's
about the buildings then.
The building? So what I would love for future folks to know is a little bit is just quick bit about our history. So we're founded during the Civil War as the Army Medical Museum. It wasn't gunshots and artillery that killed the soldiers, it was diseases. And the Surgeon General of the Union forces was tasked to pull together tissue specimens to study what happened. And that winds up in a collection which becomes what's known as the Army Medical Museum. Had a number of homes over the years, but it continued to grow and grow. We were located for many, many, many years at 7th and Independence Avenue, one of the most visited museums in the world. So the front of the house is the museum, and if you're visiting, you're nodding, you know that you would never have forgotten what was there.
No, I went to the one on the mall and up
And the
there.
mall, so yeah, and then, so that stayed there for a while, but then they moved the back of the house up here in the 1940s when it evolved that they wanted, the Army Medical Museum became the Army Institute of Pathology and then Tri-Service, right after World War II when the Air Force came in. They built this atomic bomb-proof building. If you go up there today and you go in the front door, you'll see that there are like vault doors to protect the building. There were no windows, literally, there were no windows. And then they built the second part of it on some years later, eventually to house it, housed on the bottom, it housed the National Museum of Health and Medicine, which had been on the mall. That was taken from the mall for the Hirshhorn to be built there. So it lost its visitorship to the museum, but the museum and us, we all stayed as one. The building was fascinating, a thick atomic bomb-proof structure, multiple stories high, no windows in the old building. It was a tremendous Cold War era relic of construction. And I believe they've kept it as a historical property. You can still see it says Armed Forces Institute of Pathology if you go in the front of it. It still has the sign for National Museum of Health and Medicine. I hope they keep that up there. But the idea of the way the building was constructed was really designed as a prototype for how maybe federal buildings could be built. It could serve as the president's command center in the event of a nuclear attack on DC. And it was a fascinating place to work. We also had so many different groups that worked with us in the building. The Walter Reed TV station was located in there. We had a group that did all of the exhibits for not only AFIP, but for Walter Reed. So when they would go out to national conventions, they would create displays and exhibits for them that they worked in there. Part of our team at AFIP included veterinary pathology because we handled all of the working dogs and the animals in the service. Fides is right when we talked about her role as an infectious disease pathologist. You were onto something there about, I think, Bruley ulcer and leprosy and things, because everything was done with the soldier in mind, where we would be deployed, where our troops would be deployed, so that we would have a better handle on how to treat them. The other thing I wanted to say was that the pathologists, the day-to-day work of the pathologists would be, they would gather around a table like this with the multi-headed scopes, taking a look at tissue samples. So groups would send in pathology samples to us every day. Thousands of samples would come in. As Ron was describing, they would be cut by our histopathology groups and then looked at for a second opinion. And they wrote books. They wrote the books, our guys, on tumor pathology called the fascicles. So if you went to a pathology department somewhere in the country, one of our books would be there. It was a fascinating place, humming with excitement and really making a difference in the world.
So these specimens were coming in from elsewhere, right?
Right. We're a second opinion pathology, totally. So we did a couple of things. We would do it for Walter Reed. Walter Reed was the premier teaching hospital, and for all of the military hospitals, we'd get cases that would come in. So you're not feeling well. You go to a doctor, and the doctor says you need a biopsy. They would do a biopsy, and the doctor would look at the biopsy and say, his pathologist would look at the biopsy and say, I think it's this, but it might not be. I'll send it to the AFIP to get a confirming second opinion. And subspecialty departments, like Fides described, would be there to look. You know, it was a liver. Would come in and we would have some of the best experts in the world who would take a look at it, and they would say, we agree with you or we disagree. And in about 5% of the time in the cases that we received, we made a major change to a diagnosis, which impacted patient care. We ran other things here, I gotta tell you, you need to know too. There's a building that's now, it was the old Walter Reed Theater. It became the Radiologic Education Center, Radiologic Pathology Education Center. We taught all of the radiologists, clinical radiologists who were studying for their boards would come here to take this exam. So they would match up gross tissue specimens in slide form and things with the radiologic look. And they would be trained in how to identify what they would see in a CAT scan and an X-ray. And we put hundreds of residents who would come in each year specifically for that. And we were always working with all of the local military hospitals and worldwide hospitals to consult with them on all those things. Histopathology department, we trained histopathologists for the military right at AFIP too. So they would be able to be the ones to work with Ron and with Fides on getting them the sliced tissue specimens. We work with Walter Reed on their prostate. There was a prostate center here at Walter Reed, the high level cases. So we would study prostates that would come over right at surgery. We would be able to give instant diagnoses. So it was a really fascinating place to work. Yep.
I was just going to add a couple of things as to what he had said about things going on all the time. You can imagine the military, people retiring, people being promoted. For me, a small kid out of Sebring, Ohio, I mean, you know, it was just amazing.
Did you get any, did you have to look at specimens or whatever, samples from, you know, a president or?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. In fact, Fides and I, they had a vault out at the Joint Pathology Center with very specialized, I think it was something on Eisenhower, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sections, I guess they did an autopsy on him. And at
even
one time I
images,
looked at
X-rays.
a section from Liberace.
Liberace.
Yeah, you know, you just,
Liberace.
just amazing what you might see coming through. And of course, this was all, of course, ultra private and whatever.
But Liberace was in the military? How did Liberace get to Walter Reed? Or
Well, they did an autopsy on him, and someone thought maybe there was a fungus there. So they sent it to us, and if we could verify that. And I think we said we could not verify a fungus there, or whatever. But they wanted completeness. And, you know, the AFIP was probably the first place that identified the bacillus that causes Legionnaire's disease. If you remember that back in '76. And there was so much turmoil at that time, and nobody knew anything. And I think we were the first ones to actually see the organism in lung tissue. Taubenberger with the 19...
Oh my God, I forgot to talk about that
Yeah,
too.
Oh, yes, Spanish
the
influenza.
unknown soldier. They identified that at the
Unknown soldier.
AFIP.
And the Spanish influenza.
We
Yeah, the
had-
Spanish flu. Tell you.
Yeah,
May
tell
I?
that, Chris.
May I? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So this is unbelievable. Every case that we get, we used to keep a little portion of it. So most of the cases that would come in, they might come in if they weren't a gross specimen, it would be part of a specimen, or they would come in paraffin blocks.
Blocks.
and we would keep cases. Well, we had cases that went back to the 1918 Spanish flu from soldiers who died of the flu. And we had one of our great, brilliant young mind, Dr. Jeff Taubenberger, was an infectious disease pathologist who was looking at various things. And he had the green light to go ahead and take a look out at our tissue repository, samples from soldiers who died of the flu in 1918, and using they cut up these blocks. They worked over years to do DNA analysis on it, and they broke the code. They were the ones that did the code for the 1918 Spanish flu to help try to understand why it made it so particularly virulent. And for years, we gave presentations and discussions about how we can prevent another worldwide pandemic, the irony of it all, right? To help open up some of the ways for that. And that was another fascinating thing. All this stuff was happening in the 90s. Right, yeah, we had the forensic pathology group, DNA, Dr. Taubenberger in the 1918 Spanish flu. There was just fascinating things that went on within the building, you know?
What exactly is in the wax? Is it
Paraffin
cells?
blocks,
Paraffin blocks?
tissue
It's
samples.
Tissue
That's
from,
been preserved.
tissue from victims of the Spanish flu?
Right, they were actually soldiers who
Like
died
from
of the
their
flu.
lungs, or-
Lung tissue.
Well, you have tissue, and they make it into a block, and then they cut it on a microtome and put just maybe a 3 or 4 micrometer slice, like a loaf of bread, on a slide. And then that's what the pathologist studies. The rule of thumb was that the AFIP never threw anything away. So at the present time, the repository or the collection, whatever you want to call it, is at the Joint Pathology Center in Silver Spring. And at the present time, they have 55 million glass slides. Now you think about that, 55 million. And you know, you ought to go over there and look at the machine that you push all the buttons and you want 45,010. And they can give you that slide. Now that was a long time ago, and it spits out that slide. The other thing is, Wayne Myers, who Fides mentioned was her mentor, he was actually, he was so well known in leprosy and Buruli ulcer. He was the international president of the whole organization worldwide. And then he ended up with a Buruli ulcer. But he had a lot of research going on in Africa, numerous countries in Africa, and they would send the specimens into the AFIP. Even though they weren't civilian Americans and they were not military, he got approval to do that. And if you take leprosy, which, like I said, is not basically indigenous to the U.S., but I'll tell you that in just 1 second, we have in the repository 20 or 30,000 cases of leprosy from Africa. And the AFIP probably has more about leprosy than probably any country in the world, because we did do pathology for foreign countries. And they had some diseases, of course, that are not indigenous to the United States. So that's part of that repository. And the other thing is, like I said, they don't throw it away. If you're here at Holy Cross, after a certain length of time, the building is going to be bulging with blocks and slides, and it costs money to maintain those, because you want to have a certain amount of temperature and humidity. And I've been to Brazil and some other countries doing pathology and whatever, and well, could you show me the block? And yeah, here's the block. It's half eaten by mice and whatever. You know, out there in the real world, it's not like the AFIP, where they're all maintained with temperature, humidity, and in boxes and the mice can't get at them and ruin the tissue. So, you know, the repository at the AFIP is just, well, I can't even explain to you the value of it. But I can tell you this, Hopkins, a guy called me one day from Hopkins and wanted to know if I had any material I could share with him on not mycobacteriosis, but where's my 2-bit brain? Polio.
Oh,
Who would have polio today, cases?
none.
Nobody has polio. Polio's wiped out. And while there are still some cases that are acquired, even in this country, but very rare. But most patients, when they got the vaccine and all, they just pitched it. You know, it takes time, storage and whatever. But yeah, he's called me wanting, well, the FIP has material on everything, including smallpox. There's not a disease on this planet that they don't have at the AFIP in that repository. Now, down the road, someone may come up with some idea with a tissue or the block of the slide that can render a better opinion of that material.
Are these slides, this repository, is that considered part of the museum, or is that its own thing? It's its own thing.
It's its own thing. The slides, we kept a number of slides, the way it would come in, part of the slide collection was kept actually on floors inside the building for a while, but then they moved it out to the Forest Glen campus into big warehouses out there.
The AFIP was like CDC.
So they have a pathology lab at Naval Medical Center, and that's what supposedly replaced
So
it?
there's, right, what happened was that after, the decision was made to close the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology, and that we would no longer have a civilian mission. So part of our role is that because we became, 100 years ago, once we became such a go-to place for pathology, civilian pathologists would consult with us and they would send us cases. And they needed a way to codify how are we going to do that? And they created this American Registry of Pathology that worked specifically with the civilian community and eventually we charged cases. They used to come in for free. Wow. We started to charge them so that we could reap something to pay for this.
I mean, the good of the AFIP outweighed anything anybody could begin to tell me. Because we were there like NIH and CDC for the people of this country, not just the military. Why can't we do both? But,
Yeah.
So thank God they didn't throw out the repository.
No, that's a national, that's a,
They
yeah.
should be.
Those
They
tissue
couldn't.
samples are really, really important.
Yeah.
So I'd asked about the museum and whether things kept being added up
The
constantly or
museum,
what.
the museum took in, assessed various, high-level exhibits and could rely on what we had. But yeah, they've continued to flourish. I've not been to the new museum location, but they're alive and well as sort of the visible presence of what has been the military's role in healthcare in the United States. And so that's been a good thing. And I'm grateful, having been back, we took a little tour the last time we were here. I'm grateful that Children's National Medical Center has taken over and put substantial funds into that building and created a nice footprint there itself to maintain it and to continue. It's good to see that it's there.
So what was it like working in a building with no windows?
It's hilarious. You wouldn't know. There were days I would walk out and into a thunderstorm. I said, "Where did this come from?" Yeah, right.
Yeah,
You
right,
wouldn't know.
yes,
You would.
No
You just.
windows.
It was really bizarre. Yeah, you're like, oh, it's raining outside.
Just got used to it.
You got used to it. Yeah, it was fine. Bad days in the early 2000s, they were always doing work at the building. We always needed repair, and there was always fire alarms.
Oh my God.
So we were
yes.
always being
false
false
fire
alarms. We'd lose 2 hours a day. We'd do it multiple times a
You had
week.
to run outside?
Had to run outside. Sometimes I wouldn't know. They just send us home. Because there was, fire alarms. They were, maybe somebody was down with a torch in one of the lower areas doing things. I'm very surprised that the building was taken over because there were so many. They built this building with thick reinforced concrete, and there are pipes that go after a while. How do you get into them and repair them? So that's kind of a big deal. in the early 2000s, late 99, early 2000s, they completely renovated the upper floors of where these folks worked. There were the fourth floor. There were BSL-3, and do we have a BSL-4 lab up there
Yeah.
too? They created state-of-the-art labs, which I'm sure Children's is using now, you know, to look at pathogens, and it was really that was a good thing.
What is BSL?
Oh, biosafety level, highest biosafety level to take a look at infectious diseases and things like that. So, you know, really, they put some good money into that. The campus itself was a thriving campus when I was here. You know, the building 2, which was just demolished, was the hub for everything. So we were always in and out of that building there, and would still maintain the history. We were all in and out of building 1 a lot. The old Walter Reed, it was a credit union there, I think, and travel agencies and some other things that you could go in and use. So it's a loss that they've left, the whole campus, but it's nice to see the good things that have sprung to life here.
Yeah, it's good to see that they kept all of most of the buildings there.
Did
Yeah.
you know Bob McCauley?
No.
Okay.
Who's he?
Bob McCauley was a veterinary pathologist who was
Oh,
at the
yes.
AFIP
I
for
remember.
a few years. And I saw him over at the Joint Pathology Center a couple years ago. And he told me that he was the last living person that ever worked at the red brick building downtown. And I said, excuse me, I worked at the red brick building downtown. Now, he died about a year ago, had a melanoma, and he died. So if he was the last surviving one, then I replaced him.
Ron, are they going to take you over to the medical museum, Ron?
I didn't know.
I was kidding you 30 years ago asking you that.
Oh, he worked in the old museum.
The old red brick was the
That-
7th and
the one
Independence.
where
Let me
Yes,
tell
ma'am.
you, that was down there where they demolished it and built the Hirshhorn place. Okay. I was down there, and 4,000 kids primarily went through that place a day. I'll never forget going up the steps or whatever. They're all looking for that baby with 2 heads, you know.
Well, there's
Yeah.
other stuff.
But
that-
yeah, buses would stop, and 4,000 a day went through the medical museum down there. But I was privileged to work down there. It was right on the mall. We'd go out and throw the football around out on the mall. But you talk about parking being bad.
I'll
Can
bet.
you imagine down there?
Oh,
it was just
yeah.
a small area back
I got
there
that, Ron.
behind
I
there.
forgot that you were down
Oh,
there. That's
yeah.
really great.
But
No
yeah,
metro.
You heard
yeah,
such great
I
stories.
worked at the red brick building.
Oh,
Yeah, unbelievable. I can hardly remember that, but it was a fact.
Why don't you show your
What is this?
T-shirt?
Yeah,
Oh,
show
yeah.
your T-shirt, Ron.
We've all run with Ron.
Yep.
Now let me just say one other final thing. Fides did run in a 10K.
Thanks to you.
Well, that's pretty good. Yeah.
That's good, yeah.
That's from the AFIP running club, which was quite involved at the time. And I'll just say a couple things about it. We met on the last, go ahead. The last Friday of the month, we met, and people would run from Walter Reed down to the Jefferson Memorial. Now, those were the guys that could run 10 miles. And then
Did you
there
bring
were
that?
people that we got a bus here, and it would take people down to the zoo and let them out at the zoo, and that was a 5-mile run. So people could run the 10 or they could run the 5. And then when they got down to the Jefferson Memorial, the bus would be there waiting for us and bring us back. And what a tremendous service. And I told someone, I don't know if it was you or not, that we had a woman that was most unusual, that she skipped rope all the way from Walter Reed to the Jefferson Memorial.
Wow.
Wow.
And I remember running behind her once, and I could hardly keep up with her. But that was pretty unusual. But we had a good running group, and we had different courses that we ran from here. I think we had a 2 or 3 mile course, and a 5 and a 7. And we would start at the AFIP and go down 16th Street and then cut over into the Rock Creek Park off of, what's that main street there? The
Where you
main,
could enter
that
Rock Creek
main
Park off
road
Sig-
there by the school. School's on the corner. You know where I mean, Chris?
I think I do. Yep.
Manila, it begins with an M.
Okay.
But we would start and run Rock Creek Park, and then a lot of times we'd come up out of the park there at Sherrill, which is pretty
Steep.
steep. I remember running that, it was 100 degrees, coming up that hill out of Rock Creek Park. Or we'd run on down and through the tennis courts off of Kennedy or whatever.
Yeah, Kennedy.
So we had different routes we would go, depending on various, sometimes maybe the weather or whatever. But we had a good group, and it was just amazing that they could supply us with that bus. But they might not do that today.
So you ran down and ran back, or you ran down and the bus brought you back?
Well, if during the regular days, we would run around the community, around here, different routes. But on that last Friday of the month, you ran from here down to the Jefferson, and then the bus picked you up and brought you back.
Do they have showers here?
So that was 10 miles down there, yeah.
sure did.
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
You bet.
I never used
We
to.
probably had the bus filled most of the time.
They did have showers.
Yeah.
And
That
you
was
would-
one of the best parts because the military so emphasized being in PT. Always good to take advantage of that. And they had showers inside the building that we used. And so I'd go out for a run, or we would meet up for a run at lunchtime a couple times a week, and then you could do that. And that was always fun. And there was always a group of people doing it. And this young lady here would get involved. It was really fun. And it was a very dynamic place to work. And when we talk about pathologists, they tend to be a very quiet group, I mean, I'm pretty gabby, and I could still see the looks of some of the guys giving it to me, like, hi, everybody, So they're very academic, very brilliant people who would, they would just do anything they could to come to the AFIP to study. You come here for a couple years and see things, and you could take that back out. And so over the course of the years, either if they came as military pathologists and went back out, or they came as civilians and worked here, and their good work wound up in the community elsewhere. And while they were here, they were just a pleasure to work with, and to be able to help promote and to do things with, to the international pathology community, to the military. We were always working to try to reinforce our military role. The other thing, Ron may have had a lot of time to do a case, he would say, but we had what they called turnaround time. So he really, he was very good at that. And in that what that meant was that, we had patients at the other end, and we needed to get back. So they were important. If he was looking at a case that might have come in late that didn't matter a whole lot, he could spend more time with. But they were just amazing people to be able to get this done and to share it. And to be up here during such a vibrant time was a real pleasure. There was always interaction. Wouldn't you say, Fides?
Yes,
Would you
uh-huh,
say the interaction with other,
With other
when you were
hospitals,
fellowship? Yeah.
Yeah.
We were probably one of the first labs to ever identify the cause of Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which is a very tiny gram-negative bacillus. Two of the smallest gram-negative bacilli would be that and the Legionnaire's disease. That's why they were having such a hard time identifying the Legionnaire's bacillus. But the Rocky Mountain spotted fever, someone goes out west in Montana and they're hiking and they get sick and they die. And they do an autopsy and they can't find the cause. And they sent some of those to us, and we had a stain that could identify that organism. And I think we were about the first lab to ever identify, otherwise, they'd say probably Rocky Mountain spotted fever. We said it is. And the organisms were primarily found in the endothelial cells of blood vessels. of almost any organ. And those were tremendous cases.
Did you work on,
I worked
Both of
on all of them, most all of them.
did we miss any stories that really need to be captured on tape?
I just think the vibrancy of the community, I'll always miss the vibrancy that of our community, but of the joint community here on the campus. When we've driven back, it's like driving back to your college or your old neighborhood and seeing things have changed. But, you know, the footprint is here, you know,
Do they still have the sign, the AFIP? Because I haven't looked.
yeah,
They still have it?
yeah,
Oh,
there's a
that's
sign there,
good.
yeah.
They're not gonna remove it, that's
No,
great.
I hope not.
I hope
And,
not.
that to me is the most important thing for people to remember as we talk
Yeah.
now in 2021. There are buildings here on campus that are ghost buildings now, but rare. The old Walter Reed Army Institute of Research is just sort of hanging there. We were all here when they built the Malone House, or they built up the Malone House. They built the Fisher House, which are now being used. And seeing some of the changes are really, really good. It's really positive things that we're seeing here that are ongoing. But it was, parking was a hassle, but just the busyness of this community all the way around was good, and the interactions with the local community were really good.
Fides, do you have any final words?
I will always have fond memories of the AFIP. You know, that was the best place to work. The working environment was great. The people were great. There were three objectives for the AFIP, right? You had consultation, education, and research. And I was able to get all three. So, you know, the education, the knowledge that you gain from all these pathologists, big-time pathologists, yeah. They're fun memories, and I will never forget.
The AFIP sets a standard. It was the Supreme Court of Pathology in the world. You wouldn't generally argue with the AFIP, and
I think we could all agree we had the best jobs in the world when we were
Oh,
there.
yeah,
It's just
yeah.
fabulous. Just fabulous. Miss it to this day.
I'm so happy that you were able to tell about it on this.
Thank you.
oh, it was just everything together. You know, to me, the AFIP was like a family. And I'll never forget when I first came there, like Chris said, they had a guy who worked with glass. He would make anything you want for an experiment in glass. It was like a family, and he's there to help you. Ron, what can I do for you? What do you need? I'll try to make anything you need. That's the way it was. It was just a big family organization. Everyone tried to help everybody else, and
then we had picnic day.
Picnic day, the FIP picnic every year
Every
out
year.
at Forest Glen. That was always a lot of fun. We organized that and get everybody out there. Yeah. And I can attest that Ron's only gotten quieter over the years. I mean, I've known him all these years. He's just a quiet guy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, my man.
I think so.
He's fabulous.
Oh, there's a parasite named after him, by the way.
Oh, you're kidding.
What's
it named?
Yeah, what's the name of your parasite, Ron?
Plastophyra Ronafii.
You
know,
Say it again?
Homo sapien, Plastophyra Ronafii.
Wow, what an honor.
Well, I was the first one to actually identify it and describe it. It was a parasite usually occurs in fish, and it was in the shoulder of this man, in the deltoid muscle, and a friend of mine at CDC sent it to me.
Wow. That's
Telling you, he's the best.
strange.
Well, I was fortunate to be at the right place at the right time with good mentors. Because they taught me pathology and I taught them parasitology.
And you've got the parasite to prove it.